So here we have the Peer Support Specialist credential. My name is Ted Dale. I am the program manager for this credential, so I am the one-stop shop. All right. So the first question we usually look at is, do you need to have this credential? So there are some instances where it's required, but the legislature, did leave it as mandatory. So when do you need this credential? You don't necessarily have to have it to provide peer services, but you do need it if you are billing a health carrier for medical assistance. So Medicaid, Medicare, or just insurance for that, you need to have a DOH credential to be able to do that. If you're not billing any of that stuff, you probably don't need to have a credential with DOH to do the peer work. You do need to also have a credential if you work in a licensed facility. So if you work in a behavioral health agency or a hospital or something like that, those facility rules require that you have a credential if DOH has one available. So they're basically like, if there's one out there that you can get and you qualify to do the work, you have to get one, right? So those will be the two instances when you have to have the CPSS credential. Otherwise, it is considered voluntarily and you can work without it. However, the last note on there, it is title protected. So you can't call yourself a certified peer support specialist unless you have the DOH credential. You can't put in your signature line, anything like that. You can use something similar like a peer specialist, peer supporter, whatever you want to do. I would suggest dropping the word certified, because that certified is what kind of indicates that you're credentialed through DOH. But you can call yourself a peer counselor, anything else like that. You just can't call yourself a certified peer support specialist because it implies that you have the credential from DOH. So if you are in one of those agencies, you're probably working as an AAC. The AAC, we're transitioning over to the CPSS, so AACs can only provide peer services through the end of the year. Starting January 1, 2027, you have to have the CPSS to provide peer services in an agency, and you can't do it under the AAC anymore. So what are the differences between these two credentials, some of the stuff that we've been coming up with? So the peer support specialist, independent. You don't have to work in a specific agency. You don't have to be approved for any of that kind of stuff. You just have to get the DOH credential to be able to do that work. Whereas the AAC, you have to be employed by one of those agencies or, someone that's approved to hire an AAC to get the credential. With the peer support specialist, you have to complete the training before you can apply. So even as a trainee, you have to have the HCA training completed to be able to do that work. For the AAC, the registration for that, there's no education or training that's required. Even working as a peer, DOH doesn't check to make sure you had the training. That's on the agency to do that. The AAC is kind of a catch-all. It does a lot of different stuff, and peers are just one of those things in there. So we don't have to give that to DOH as an AAC. The peer support specialist, the trainee has to be supervised by an approved supervisor. So that's spelled out in law, who can do that, who can provide that certification. There's some more rules around it. The AAC, you're just supervised by your agency. We don't specify any kind of person that has to supervise you. It doesn't have to be a clinical person. You just have to be supervised by an agency representative. And for the scope of practice for the peers is limited to just peer interventions, right? You can provide peer supports, do peer work, all that kind of stuff. Whereas the AAC, you can do stuff beyond the peer work. You can do different forms of counseling. You can do case management. You can do things like that as an AAC. And so we're seeing a lot of agencies that do that. And the peers work more than just as peers, which can be an issue, which I'll talk about in a second. The last thing is that the credential has to be active before you can practice. The AAC, they can practice while pending. So the agencies were able to hire somebody, then send them to the training, and then get them going, and they can work the whole time. That is not going to work in the future. That's just not going to work in the same manner. So we are encouraging HCA to tell everybody after they take the training to just turn around and apply with us so that they have the credential. So when you're looking for a job, you already have the credential in pocket and you're good to go, and you can start right away, and there's no pending stuff coming forward. Those last two have been kind of one of the issues with the peer groups and the agencies coming forward for that, because a lot of people, like I said, they do case management or different things like that beyond just the peer work. And what the agencies are finding is they're going to have both credentials. They're going to have to keep the AAC and have the CPSS in order to do the work that they were already doing before. So that's kind of one of the issues that you're looking at. If you have that dual credential, you might have to keep both if you're doing case management or other work outside of that. And again, that practicing while pending was a big kind of boost to get people in and get them up and running. And that doesn't work with this credential. In fact, it doesn't work for most of our credentials. I think there's only 2 or 3 that you can actually practice while pending. And so that's going to be kind of a change in the way it works if you're working for an agency. All right, so how do you apply for the credentials? Before you apply, I would suggest reading through the rules. You attest that you're familiar with them when you sign up, but it really helps to outline how it works and what all the requirements are and what's expected. So RCW 18.420 and WAC 24629, they read together. The RCW is kind of the overarching look at the credential, and it kind of gives you the main view, and then the WAC fills in the details. So they'll say, DOH has to approve this or that, and then the WAC spells out exactly what we're looking for within that. We also developed the peer support ethical guidelines. We did that through the rule revision process with the peers, in meetings to kind of hash that out and develop it. So it's similar to some of the national organizations. I can't remember which is it, if it's not. I can't remember the group now that does it, but there's national ones. Each state kind of has their own peer ethical guidelines, and so this is just kind of a similar format to that going forward. And then the next thing you would want to do is determine if you qualify for the full CPSS or if you need to apply for the CPSS trainee. So if you have over 1,000 hours of experience before July 1st, 2025, when the credential came out, but after you took the HCA training, if you have 1,000 hours in that window, then that can work to meet the experience requirements. If you were working as an agency affiliated counselor for 1 year after you took the HCA training, but before the end of 2026, then that would work for the experience requirements as well. You can also do it if you were credentialed in another state and you have at least a year of being credentialed in that other state. That will work to meet the experience requirements for that year. And then you will need to also take the gap training and the peer prerequisite training online from HCA to meet the educational course. So those 2 online courses you can take for that, and then you'll also qualify for the training. And lastly, if you hold a national certification, there's a handful of national certifications we spell out in the WAC. If you have one of those, you meet the education experience. You don't need to do anything else. Your national certification will get you in for that. And then it has the actual WAC numbers in there for that. But if you don't meet one of those criteria for the education and the experience, then you would need to go and apply as the CPSS trainee. Looking at the different credentials, they're fairly similar. The educational requirements are the same. So you need either that new 80-hour training that HCA has been offering, or if you took the 40-hour CPC training beforehand, you need to take the online GAP training. So it's online, it's free, but it does take like 6 hours to do the GAP training. So it's a pretty intensive course, and it basically has all the information that was added into to make the 40-hour course an 80-hour course. So with those two, you meet the education requirements for that. For the full peer support specialist, again, you have to have 1,000 hours as a CPSS trainee or one of those other options that I had outlined in the last slide about the way to meet requirements with your previous experience coming in. Both of these credentials require an attestation that you either have you self-identify as having a year in recovery from a mental health condition or a substance use disorder or both, or you're the parent or legal guardian of a youth who has had that. And so HCA wants to see that when you sign up for the training and get through there. So it shouldn't usually be an issue once you've had the training. But again, we have a form you're going to have to sign that you would legally attest that, yes, you meet those requirements. So how do you apply? This is a screenshot of our webpage. This is our main peer support specialist webpage. You want to go to the certification information section on the left side menu bar right there. If you click in, you can apply on paper or online for the online method for that. And you notice that there's 2 different spots. The top one's for the CPSS and the next one underneath that is CPSS trainees. Has the same kind of options underneath each one. You just expand the list out. Make sure you get the right one because DOH fees are non-refundable. Now, there's no fee for the trainee, but if you apply for the wrong one, we don't refund the fees back just because you applied for the wrong credential. Additionally, if you are going to be applying for the full CPSS, you need to show that you have that experience with us. So you will still need to go into the apply on paper section and pull up one of those 2 forms. The first one is the verification of trainee experience. So that's if you get your experience as a CPSS under an approved supervisor. If you have the previous experience, either the 1,000 hours without a credential or the AAC, you want the second form for non-trainee experience. And if you look, there's a spot on the second page of that one that has like option A is for the AAC, and then your option B would be for just the hours. You will still need an employer or a behavioral health provider that you worked with to sign off on those hours. So it doesn't have to be someone that's an approved supervisor. It can just be your company or your agency that you work with. Whoever can sign off on that form for you. It doesn't have to be the approved supervisor. Okay. And you also notice if you are a supervisor yourself, or you've gone through the supervision training for that, the joint experience part, or if you had a year before the credential came out, July 1, 2025, this last form down there is that one. That's your supervision form, and that's what will allow us to track if you're a supervisor or not. You also have to have the HCA supervisor training in that form. You can submit both of those, and then we will list it on your credential. It will say approved supervisor, yes or no, on the bottom, and we'll reprint it and change it to yes and give you that, and then we'll have you listed as an approved supervisor. All right, so how do you apply on paper? We've been having some technical issues with our database and getting this credential up. We switched over to a new database this year, and and we had some issues kind of getting it up and running. And this was the very first brand new credential that we've developed. Everything else transferred over from our old database, and this was the new one. So of course there was issues with it going forward, and we've had, various couple week windows where we haven't been able to do anything. We are currently in a window where we're having some problems because we just did our final rollout, and there's some glitches going through there. So if you apply on paper because you want to get it in right away, you can download or print the application. You can't download it electronically and fill it out with something like Adobe Acrobat, where you can fill it all out electronically and you don't have to fill it out by hand with a pen. But if you do that, you do need to sign the form at the end with a pen, and also the recovery attestation. So you can fill everything out electronically except those signature spots in there. Those need to be filled out with a pen and paper and send it in. So make sure you sign both of those. Include any copies of your training certificates that you have. So and we need, like if you took the 40-hour, we'll need the 40-hour certificate and the gap training certificate. And we'll also need the letter that gives your exam score. So there's an extra letter that went with it that you said you got, 95 out of 100 or whatever it is on your score for that. We'll need both of those because we have to verify that you also passed the exam. And we do ask for that because they're not always inclusive. A lot of the courses, they do the training and the exam all at once. But they did have some training providers previously that didn't give the exam. So you would take the training and then you have to go sign up and take the exam separately. So we do need both of those components coming in. And then don't forget the fee. There's only a fee for the full CPSS. The CPSS trainee has no fee. Okay, so what does the application look like as you're going in here? These are the different sections that you're going to fill out. If you want to have a sneak peek, you can go pull it up on the apply on paper, and you can see exactly what we're going to be asking for in the electronic application before you go and fill it out. So you know exactly what we're looking at. This is a basic overview, your demographic information, name, contact information, personal data questions about your fitness to practice, if you have any criminal history or substance abuse issues. The education and training is in there to see your courses. We only need the stuff that is relevant to this credential. So we really only need your HCA trainings, the GAP, the CPC, any of those kind of things. If you have like a bachelor's degree in accounting or something like that, you don't have to put that in here. It's not relevant to the credential. You can just leave it off. We don't need that. We don't need your transcripts, anything like that. Save you some time and effort to do all that. But we do need, if you have a credential in another state, even if it's not a peer credential, any kind of credential from another state, we're going to need to get a verification for that. There's a form that we'll need you to take to the other state to get that filled out. Again, sign the attestation that is true and correct. And then also the recovery, that you're an individual in recovery for that. The other thing to note is those two forms that I showed you earlier for those supervision experience. If you had your supervised experience, or you're going through somebody that's a previous employer, you might want to reach out to them and make sure that they're open to signing that, and hopefully you left on good terms. We have had people where they refuse to sign off on stuff that they did, and DOH doesn't get involved with that. We don't go out, we don't make anybody sign the form. That's up to you. If you can't get them to sign it, they refuse. You may have to work as a trainee and redo those hours again going forward for that. And then fill out each section. If it doesn't apply to you, put like NA or something in there for that, because if something's left blank, then we will bounce it back for a corrected version of that. And please write legibly. We need to be able to read it. If you're submitting it on paper and you're filling it out with a pen, we have sent them back, and we don't necessarily like try and figure out just a bunch of words. We're just kind of like, we can't read all this. Please resubmit the whole thing over again. So plan ahead. One other thing I want to talk about is approved supervisors. So it is defined in the RCW and in the WAC of who's an approved supervisor that can do the hours for the trainees. And that is a CPSS that has at least 1,500 hours of experience as a full CPSS. So that would be after you finish being a trainee, became a CPSS, you need to get another 1,500 hours on top of that. And you need to have the supervisor course, the HCA supervisor course. So once you have the time and the course, then you can start earning your 500 hours of joint supervision experience. The 500 hours is part of the 1,500. So you really just need 1,000 hours of experience. Then you can start doing the 500. Then you can be a supervisor. So you don't need a total of 2,000. You need a total of 1,500. So don't double up on that. You can start earlier than going. And if you have that a year of previous supervision experience, then that will qualify for the 500 hours. But you do still need to take the HCA supervisor course. So you could have been a supervisor for years for peers, whatever, going forward, and you take the HCA supervisor course next week. That's still fine. You don't have to do the experience after you took the course. You just have to have all of those to check off the box. An approved supervisor is either the CPSS that meets those requirements, or a behavioral health provider, which is defined kind of in the statute, but includes the licensed counselors, psychologists, SUDPs, physicians and PAs, nurses, and osteopathic physicians. I would note that AACs are not considered an approved supervisor. So a lot of those AACs working in agencies as a peer, that credential does not qualify you to be an approved supervisor in this list. So it will need to be somebody else that provides that training. If all they have is an AAC, that's not good enough to be an been approved to supervisor. So things to note, because there are a lot of AAC peers out there that are supervisors. One of the other questions I get a lot of is, I have criminal convictions. Does that disqualify me from applying for this credential at all? So I try and include this slide in all of my presentations just for awareness. There are no disqualifying conditions to get any DOH credential. There's nothing out there that we take it that we just look at and say, nope, you can't get it, automatic denial. That doesn't work that way. Now, DSHS has a list of people who, of convictions that if you have, you can't work with vulnerable populations. So children or vulnerable adults, something like that. But that's specific to those DSHS agencies, not to get the DOH credential. So there's a bit of a separation there. We review each of these applications individually and independently on a case-by-case basis. So it's not uncommon that we get a lot of people that apply that might have some criminal history. We see it a lot in our SUDPs, was another credential I used to be a PM for, and they have a lot of people with life experience. There's criminal history, stuff like that. It comes up. It's not uncommon for us to get this kind of stuff. And I would also point out that there can be conditions or limitations that are put on it. It's not just a blanket yes or no. It's not a yes, you get it, no, you don't, you're done. Typically, we very rarely deny people outright the credential. Typically, we put conditions on them. So it could be like your supervisor sends in quarterly reports. Yeah, I'm watching them. There's nothing going on. They're doing really well. No concerns, that kind of stuff coming in. So it's usually not too onerous, but there is just kind of a little bit of a monitoring period for that. When these applications do come in, they're reviewed by a team of people. It's not just one person that's going to look at it and say yes or no. And that includes our staff attorneys, our investigators, and somebody from the program, me, more likely my supervisor. But we kind of go through them as a team and look at everything of what we want to do with these coming forward. So it's not just going to be one person that looks at your application and makes that decision. There is a special exemption in rule for the peers, so that if you have at least 1 year in recovery, we don't put you into our monitoring program. So that is our RAMP program, and it's for people with, substance use disorder concerns, and they have daily check-ins, random urinalysis, and the cost is completely borne by the credential holder. So you guys, there is a fee with it. It can get expensive, and it can last for a long time, depending, on what the evaluation determines. I mean, you can see 2, 3, 5 year kind of contracts with RAMP moving forward. So applicants have this thing where we don't put you in there automatically for any amount of time, but it can come up later if you relapse. There's an arrest or something like that. It can come back. Finally, this is the different regulations and resources we got for you as the statute, WAC, guidelines. We also have a peer support specialist fact sheet there's a requirement to kind of present information to the participants that we call clients or participants. And it kind of explains how peers are different than the clinical providers. And so this form will allow you to meet that requirement. Then we have our webpage, the bills that created it, and the healthcare authority. So we also have information on our website under resources for contacts for the healthcare authority. If you need to get copies of your training certifications or something like that, you took it 10 years ago, you can't find it, you don't know where it is, they can get you another copy of that to apply. And of course, my contact information. And that is it.
Thank you, Ted. And so now we are going to open up the floor, peer community. And we know that you have tons of questions. We are at different points in the process. And so please feel free to place those electronic hands up, and Lisa Brown will go through and start going through the questions.
Yeah, so we run a background check to see what comes up on that, and so it will show you different history for that. There is a bit of a time limit, because if your stuff is 12 years old when it comes through CMT, we'll look at that and probably say no problem, just issue it. So it'll help on the back end, but it doesn't help on the front end. So for that, we will run a background check. It doesn't look great if you checked no, and then we find a bunch of stuff on there for that. But if there's ever a glitch or something, like where it won't let you check the correct box, that's when I would ask you to reach out to me. Like I said, we've had glitches with this credential, and it hasn't been smooth. So anytime there's something with the electronic applications, I would say just reach out to me for that. This is one of the bigger barriers that we have coming forward because we do request the copies of the judgment and sentencing documents for each of those. So you may need to call over to the courthouse for wherever you had them and ask to see if you can get copies. And just the judgment sentencing part. We don't need the whole thing because it can get expensive if you start getting all the papers.
Okay.
Because they charge for that. So just the judgment and sentencing documents and it's going to be for each of those ones. So if you have like multiple cases that went into one court, you can request all of them at the same time. For that, make it a little easier. But we are going to ask for those records. Yeah. So the supervision isn't a separate credential. There's no separate application for that. It's just the two forms. So you need to get the CPSS, the full CPSS, and then you need to submit that training, the HCA training document that you get for the certificate of completion, and the hours verification form that I pointed out, the last one on that list, to where they do that. And then you send it in, and all we do is update your current CPSS. So when you look at the bottom of the credential, it'll have a thing that says it's issued on this date, it expires on this date, your CE is due on this date, and it'll say supervisor, yes or no. And it'll say no, and then we get those forms, we'll process it, we'll send you a new one that says yes. But it'll still expire on the same day, in the same month and everything. It won't update anything. It basically updates that yes or no supervisor, as opposed to reissuing a whole brand new credential. And there's no fee. That's why it's not a separate credential, because it would be an extra fee. So this is free. Yeah, and that's kind of one of the problems that we've had. So the healthcare authority is the one that does all the trainings. We split between HCA and DOH for that. So they are prioritizing, and they basically are only taking Washington residents to do the training, because they're here to train Washington residents for that. So you're not alone. There are people from Idaho that can't get into the training because even though they work in Washington, and there are people in Oregon that can't get in the training for that. Yeah, you would have to talk with the healthcare authority, because they're the ones that do all the training, but I don't know that they really have the ability to do that either, because they have a huge wait list now for Washington residents to get into the training for that. So from my last conversations with them, they weren't able to do that kind of cross training for people in other states that they would need to do that to training in their state and come over. And yes, it is problematic. I didn't know that Oregon wouldn't credential you at all if you weren't practicing in the state, because like we don't necessarily look at where you're practicing. If you take the training and do the time and whatnot, we give you the credential, and we're not really looking at it. But I know Idaho's is like $600 to get the training for it, whereas Washington's is free. It's the training portion of it. They just don't have the volume to train a bunch of people from out of state. They only are training the Washington state people. So for other credentials, they're taking like a college degree or something like that, right? So that transfers, that's not really based on where you're at, but because this is the only training organization for Washington, they're focusing on Washington residents. All right, so if you go to resources, we have contact information for HCA. So for training, registration, and rescheduling, this is their contact here for that. You can also try and reach out to Amanda Pauley, because they might be able to do a private training. If you have multiple people, you might be able to schedule a private training at your agency to be able to do that work and get your people trained up there. Yeah, and sorry, HCA is everything for the training. I have no kind of authority over that, or no ability to do anything. Whatever they are doing is what they're doing. What someone was talking about now was the CPC. The CPC is not a certification. It's not a credential to practice. It's like a training certification. So you're not certified with the CPC that they had before. That's just a training certification. So it doesn't automatically transfer over to this. You have to actually request. The CPC training is just the educational guideline for that. So the HCA application and the DOH application are different. They're both through the state of Washington, but I've had a bunch of people lately that they fill out the HCA application and then they call in checking on the status of their DOH credential, and we have nothing for them. We see nothing. DOH and HCA, we don't see each other's stuff. we're separate for that. So so make sure you get the right one on that, and make sure you get to the right section. If you go to our website, they have instructions for how to do that, and so it tells you where to go and how to upload the DOH one, and get that in. So hopefully that helps. For the people that have the behavioral health credentials that we talked about for that, they do not have to have any training at all. They are considered an approved supervisor just by holding that credential. So it might help to be able to take a supervisor training, but I don't think you're going to get into the peer one if you're not a peer. After July 1st, 2028, then all those behavioral health providers are not approved. So at that point, they would have to be a full CPSS. So there's nothing they can do with their current credential. They have to go through, take the HCA 80-hour training. They have to get 1,000 hours as a peer, and then they have to apply for the full credential as a CPSS. And then they also have to take the HCA. They basically have to start over. So the intention was to drop off all of those clinical providers from being supervisors and only having peers to supervise peers. So if they don't qualify as a peer, they won't be able to supervise trainees after that 2028 date, which I'll put an asterisk on there. We have to give a report to the legislature in December of 27 before that expires to see if there's enough providers or not to be able to handle the load. And if our report says there's not enough, they may extend it. Yes, they can bill with the AAC through the end of this year, but they need to have an active CPSS by January 1 if they're going to be billing for peer services. It's not going to be an option for AACs to choose that billing taxonomy anymore. HCA and DOH, we talk a lot. We frequently talk, but our computers don't talk. So if you apply with HCA, I can't see any of their electronic, documents or their applications or anything, the same way they can't go in and see our applications for that. So we do talk a lot, and we have regular meetings and stuff to check in and stuff, but we actually did a lot of conferences and workshops and stuff together to get the WAC up and get the credentials up and running. Yeah, unfortunately, the timelines are always an ongoing problem with us. So we typically estimate about 2 months, 60 days for any of our applications coming through, but peers are behind. So it's a lot of it with those technical issues that we had early on. We're still trying to catch up from that. So we're under 90. We were at 90 for quite a while. We're a little under 90 now, but we're still probably close to like 75. So it's just basically there's a line. So we do them as they come in. So first in, first out. So we build up a line, and then when your application comes up, that's when we start processing it. Going forward. So it's something we're aware of, and we're trying to reduce that coming forward. But until we kind of get this database settled down, because we were just out for another week, so we're probably even more behind than we were a week ago. But it's something that we're trying to look at different ways to try and speed this up, get it going. It's just, unless we want to like raise fees, charge more, and hire more people, that's probably the easiest way to get it going, but we don't want to do that. So we're trying to find ways to minimize the processing, get a little bit more streamlined to go forward. But unfortunately, we are looking at probably 75, 80 days right now. You can tell them you're pending. You can probably show them you have a CPSS, pending number in there, and that you're, they told you 90 days and you're about, 30 days away. You can tell them that, but that's about all we can really do at this point. For the AAC, yes, you can work as while it's pending, and you're working as a peer, I'm assuming, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're good to go through the end of the year. But before the end of the year, you do need to get the other credentials for that. If your previous employer won't sign off on the hours, you probably want to go in and apply for the trainee credential now and start earning those hours at the same time you're in AAC, because you can't get a full year now with the AAC. You would have had to have got that issued in 2025 to be able to get that by the end of the year. So I would just apply for the trainee, and once that's active, start logging your hours, start meeting with your supervisor at least every other week, and start building up that stuff going forward. You can still bill as a trainee, so that'll carry over into the new year. And then once you have your 1,000 hours, you can apply for the full credential.
Okay. So I would be able to work as a like if I did the trainee, I'd be able to work as a trainee starting January 1st, 2027. But I wouldn't be able to use any of the hours that I've put in since last.
Unfortunately not. You have to have an active CPSS trainee to start accruing hours. So you can get supervised hours if you get employed as a moderator for the CPSS training. No, you need to be working as a CPSS trainee like providing services to the clients, to participants. So managing doesn't count for the hours. You have to actually be interacting with individuals and providing peer services for those hours to apply. No. So the 80 hour is the new course. They developed that when they developed this credential, they changed it from a 40 hour to an 80 hour. So if you already took the previous 40 hour, all you need to go do is take the online peer gap training. So it's available in the same spot from HCA. The gap training is basically, it has all the information that got added to the course to make it 80 hours. So it kind of fills in the gap. So you don't need to go back and retake the 80 hour training for 2 weeks. You took the 40 hour one, take the online gap training, and those two things together will meet the educational requirements. So it's either the 80 hour course or the 40 plus the gap training. It's on HCA's website. HCA does all the training. There is a link to HCA. If you go to the DOH website under resources, it has all that contact information I just showed, and it has a link to their website there. But it's the same place you signed up to take the 40 hour course with HCA.
Okay.
No, training courses do not count for that. For CE courses, don't count towards your 1,000 hours. So it needs to be like working with clients. So it can be like stuff like not just face to face. It can be like working on notes, or if you are working with their family members, different things like that. Anything towards the client care that can count for it. But any kind of trainings and stuff that doesn't count for the 1,000 hours. And you don't actually need CE until you're a full CPSS. The trainees don't have a CE requirement.
Oh, okay. And what about like doing projects for Washington Peer Network or something? Would that count toward my 1,000 hours?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh. No, well, it's 1,000 hours before July 1, 2025. So what it is if they took the CPC and they had worked as a peer for 1,000 hours before July 1, that will meet the experience requirements, right? But they will still have to go back and take the gap training to meet the educational requirements.
They
So
would still have to do the gap training.
Yep.
They just need to have that old supervisor then sign off on that 1,000 hours.
correct. Yep.
Okay.
So for anybody that took the CPC for 40 hours, they have to have the gap training. And then if they worked as a peer after taking the HCA training for 1,000 hours before that July 2025 date, then that can count for the experience as well. So they don't have to go back through and jump through all the hoops. We intentionally tried to make this, to set it up for, experienced peers to just slide right through and not have to jump through all the hoops over again.
Okay. And anybody who has just gotten the CPC, all that is at this point is a training certificate. And so if they've already gotten their CPC, would they still do a gap training, or would they?
Well, the CPC, they haven't provided it since 24. I think starting in early 2025, they
Yes.
switched to the CPSS training, which is the 80
Nice.
hour. So if they took the new 80 hour training, they don't need the gap. The gap is basically filling in the gap between the 40 hour and the 80 hour. And I'll throw this out there too before everyone starts leaving, is I do peer office hours the second Tuesday of each month at noon, which is essentially just like this, sitting here just answering questions for anybody that shows up. It's a drop-in course. Oh, let me see. Okay, so it's under rules in progress, even though we're not doing rules now. And you can join us for the peer support office hours right here. If you have questions about it, you can just click on this meeting. You don't have to sign up ahead of time. You don't have to register or do anything. You can show up right at noon on the second Tuesday and just click the button and get in for that. And so we do that here. HCA does something similar. They do them every Monday, and they do it more around the training. So that might be helpful for some of the training ones as well.
What if you get hired on June 30th and did the training in September 25? And could those 1,000 hours I've been employed with Peer Washington count, or do I need to get the trainee to start my hours?
If you didn't get it done before July 1, 2025, then you need to get a trainee credential and start getting the hours for that. Because once the rules went into effect July 1, 2025, so the RCW and the WAC, they didn't exist. They weren't active until that date. And once that date rolled over, the only way you can get hours is under a credential, either the AAC or the CPSS trainee. You can't do it without any credential after that date. You can still practice because it's voluntary, but the hours won't, so I don't count towards the credential. It's the hours when you're working and providing like services towards clients. So most of your hours should count, but it doesn't have to be just face to face. It can be the time like when you do your notes, or it could be when you are meeting with your supervisor for your supervised experience. It can be case staffing meetings when you're meeting with other people and you're talking about all your client loads, different things like that. If you're doing like ancillary meetings when you're meeting with their family members or something like that, all of that can count. What doesn't count is like trainings, staff trainings, or different things like that where you're going in and it's not specific to the client, but it's like learning the different things about that. Trainings don't really count. So it should be the stuff where you're focused on doing that work and not just other, administrative duties that are coming up for that.
So if we have a place that we have set up to provide support and you work there, does that count?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Just make sure we defer to the supervisors a lot on this. So make sure to talk with the approved supervisor about what they are willing to consider for that, because it's really up to them. If they say they don't want to count something towards those hours, then we're not necessarily going to like force them to do it. I would also suggest keeping a log of those hours and reviewing them with your supervisor when you meet with them. You're supposed to meet every other week, so review your numbers with that, because we've had people that have had disputes and they've said, well, I did this many hours, and they're like, well, I only have you doing this many hours, and it's months ago, so nobody really remembers clearly what it was, and we don't get involved with that either. It's up for you guys to that. So I would suggest being on top of those and keeping track of them as you move along.
There's a couple questions in here. What places qualifies you to get for training hours? So any behavioral health that hires peers.
Yeah, to get your experience hours, training hours have to be through an approved HCA training course.
Does my supervisor have to be a CPSS for my hours if I had my hours working in 2024?
No, if you're getting previous hours, it just has to be an employer for that. So it can be HR, it could be your manager, it can just be somebody that can legally attest that says, yes, they worked here as a peer for that time. It doesn't have to be an approved supervisors.
Okay, thank you.
And I see one question in here about avoiding the CPS acronym. That's actually why they changed the name of this credential before it went live. When they first brought it out, it was called a Certified Peer Specialist, and then nobody wanted the CPS acronym for it, so they changed it to a Certified Peer Support Specialist acronym. So you can kind of write it out however you want. There's not like an official acronym for how it is. It's generally recognized just as the CPSS, which is the title of the profession. You could I'm not sure how you would want to do it, but it should hopefully not be confused with Child Protective Services with the extra S. So we can count your previous hours from the time you took the HCA training. So if you just took the 80-hour training recently, then your time back in 24 isn't going to apply from it, because it wasn't until after you took the HCA training. So that's the first, once you take that. And then you got to get the trainee credential active, which it sounds like you're in process and it's on its way, but you don't have it yet. So what you're going to need to do going forward is you're going to need to find somebody that is an approved supervisor, either a CPSS approved supervisor or that has a behavioral health credential. It may not be somebody with where you work. You could bring in somebody from the outside. They may charge for that kind of work for it. It's up to them. But they can, as long as your employer is okay with them working with you and seeing, your clients, the participants and stuff like that, and being able to see that stuff for your organization, then they can come in and do that. You would have to meet with them at least every other week. They don't have to work there. They don't have to be on site. They don't have to watch you while you're doing the work. They just have to be available to answer questions or concerns. If something comes up, you're like, oh my God, I got this huge situation. You need to be able to reach out to them and help. They can help you address that or whatnot, and then meet with them and kind of go over the issues and problems and stuff that you're having with your client load for that. So that's probably the easier way to try and find some time. Otherwise, you could look at volunteering somewhere else that has that kind of people on staff, and they could supervise some of those extra hours that you're doing, but then you're kind of working your job and earning hours separately in another spot. And so that's not always a great way to go forward with that. but it does have to be under an approved supervisor. At least every other week. You need to get a total of 12 hours total when you apply for the full CPSS. So if you're meeting every other week, in theory, if you're working full time, you'll get that 1,000 hours in 6 months, right? So if you're meeting with them every other week, that would give you 12 meetings and give you an hour a week, or an hour every other week would get you to the 12 hours. If you're meeting every week instead of every other week, a half hour would be long enough. If you're not working full time, then then that'll probably build up a little bit better because you'll have more supervision meetings to get to that 1,000 hours.
Okay. So how many supervision hours do I need?
You need a total of 12.
12. Okay. Thank you.
And that's part of the 1,000. So you really need 988 hours in 12 hours, right? No. It's linked to your original CPSS credential. There is not a separate supervisor thing. It's essentially what happens is when you send in the training certificate from the HCA peer training and then the hours certificate that you either had it from before or you did it as joint supervision, we update your CPSS credential to say that you're an approved supervisor.
Okay, so the second part of that is on we've had some notes kicked back because the CPSS weren't added to the peer's name when they signed the notes and it was submitted to like insurance or the DOH, and it's kicked back. As I'm going to be in a position where sometimes signing off on their notes, do I need to, same thing, still do CPSS?
I would put it on there, yeah. So you have to put the CPSS because then they can go and check your name and check that your credentials active. I wanted to get the website to say if you're an approved supervisor on there, yes, no, but that was kind of like an extra ask above and beyond just getting up and running, so they haven't done it yet. But I'm hoping down the road we can get that on there. And then the insurance companies, when they check on you, it'll say approved supervisor, yes, and they'll know that you have this.
Maybe we just add a third S on the back there.
That's too many S's. We're getting way too into
I
it.
know. Hey, thank you, Ted.
Thank you. No, we've seen peers come through for the VA before. We've had multiple different credentials come through the VA for that and do that service. The VA is a little different because they don't always require the person to be credentialed in this state. They just have to have a credential in some state. So that it would be the only thing that could potentially pop up to be an issue, but it doesn't sound like that's an issue for yours because yours could be signed off because it was so long ago. It can just be the employer. So the VA is your employer and they don't have to be a approved supervisor coming forward. And if you are now an approved supervisor, if you have someone on staff that is an approved supervisor, you might want to defer to them for doing the work for it. But if it's just the employer, then it doesn't matter who signs off.
And then for the supervisory addition to it, would the same concept apply? I would just have to have my agency verify that I've been in a lead or supervisory role.
Yes, if you had it for at least a year before that July 1, 2025 date, then they can sign off on that supervisory part too, and you can send all that in all at once.
Can we still call ourselves CPC after our certification lapses? Like, say you don't have the 1,000 hours, can you still be considered a CPC?
The CPC is, again, that's the old training part for it. So you can always call yourself a CPC. You can call yourself a CPC without the DOH credential. You just can't call yourself a CPSS or a CPSS trainee unless you have an active credential. So if it expires, if you stop doing this work and it expires, you have to stop calling yourself a CPSS. Okay, did you have, well, you're going to need to apply with DOH, but that was at the beginning where I was trying to point out the determine if you or apply for the full one of the trainee. Do you have peer experience, like working on with your CPC?
Not currently, no.
Did you have experience as a peer after you took the CPC training, but before July 1, 2025?
No.
Okay, then you meet the educational requirements. You will want to apply as a CPSS trainee, and then you need to have an approved supervisor to work under to get those hours, those 1,000 hours for that.
So I count as a trainee then?
Yep, you would count as a trainee. But get your application in, because like I said, we're looking at like 90 days, so it'll still be a couple months before that comes up.
If I do any hours before that 90 days, do they count? Or just I have to be the trainee first? Okay.
Yeah, it has
All
to be
right,
an active
sorry.
CPSS trainee before you can start counting the hours. They just approve it with us. They have an attestation that they submit that says, yes, I supervised them for these 500 hours. Now, I would suggest tracking those hours on your own, make an Excel sheet or something like that, just so that you and the supervisor are on the same page and you have like the same number of hours going forward. And if for whatever reason something looked weird and we did an audit, went back, you can go back and say, yeah, these are the hours, these are the dates and times and all the stuff, and we can see that you did it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. We don't need a log. You don't have to submit them like in time or anything. We just need at the final end that last 1 page or the 2-page form that says you did the hours. You will need to submit the form, but it sounds like you probably had at least 1,000 hours before July 1, 2025. So there was like a year and a half if you started in January 24. So if you were working at a pretty regular rate, you could do the previous option. So that would be the non-trainee experience form. And if you were an AAC, then you only need a year of the AAC. You don't have to look at the hours. You probably actually could do either way. But because you have the AAC, you can just have it, your agency sign off on that, send that form in and apply for the full CPSS and skip the trainee part with your experience. You do need to have the gap training, and because you need the gap to go with your CPC training. But so once you have that done, you have the gap and your CPC, and that will meet the education requirements. And then you have that year as an AAC working as a peer, then that will meet the experience requirements, and you can apply for the full one. You shouldn't have to do anything else.
Awesome. And then, so I would need to have my supervisors sign off on the non-trainee form. When I submit that, can I add it to my pending application through Helms?
No, for the supervision forms that are signed off by somebody else, it needs to come directly from them. So I will drop a message in there with the thing, but it's going to be OHP, it's OHP section 7 at doh.wa.gov. That's our Office of Health Professions. Section 7 is the one that processes these applications, and they will match it up. Just put your credential number in the email and be like, this goes for credential, whatever. And but it has to come from the person that signs it, not from the applicant.
Okay, so that would come directly from my supervisor. Okay.
Yep. And there's a PO box at the top of the form. They can snail mail it too if they'd rather do that.
So to become a peer supervisor, do you need to accrue the 500 hours first, or do you need to get the approval to be a supervisor and then accrue the 500 hours?
You need to take the training first, the HCA peer supervisor training. Do that first. Then, because you already have so much time as a peer, you have the experience to be able to start. So then once you have the training done, then you can just start working as a peer supervisor candidate, which we describe in the WAC for that. And then you can start working under an approved supervisor, learning to be a supervisor and getting those 500 hours.
All right, there's a couple questions in the chat. So Carla said, can we look up to see if the DOH has our PSS trainee application? I think I submitted that before my 80-hour training, but now I'm hearing that maybe I need to submit it after the 80-hour training. Can you clarify?
Yes, you guys can look that up. If you want, I'll share my screen one more time here and show you where you can go to do that. So for on our webpage, if you just go to the main DOH page, we have a thing called Healthcare Provider Lookup. So you can go in here, look up a healthcare provider, and then enter your own name, information, all this kind of stuff. Check that you're not a robot and give it a search. And then it'll show up
right now, aren't we? Yeah.
Yep. And so you can go in there, you can look, and it'll say pending, or, whatever status that you're in. If you're active, it'll show that you're active, everything like that. So you can see what's in there. If you don't see anything in there and you're like, I'm pretty sure I applied, you have to make sure you didn't apply with HCA, because we're seeing that a lot where people are filling out the HCA application for the training, thinking it's the DOH application, and it's not.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And then another one, if I did my CPC in 2019 and been working as a peer ever since, started as a supervisor in 2025, have not been able to find the gap training, but I'm assuming I need the gap training. And then what?
Yes. Well, if you've been a supervisor since 2025, you wouldn't have a year before July 2025, right? So you would still need to do the joint supervision training for that. So you would need to get your credential, get your full CPSS issued, and take the HCA supervisor training. After it's going to be the same spot you do the gap training from the HCA website for that. And then get that done, and then you can start working on your 500 hours of joint supervision. If you're like a full-time manager, whatever, learning the ropes and learning to do that, you should get that in like 3 months. But if you're doing it as part-time, then it's going to just depend on how long until you can get those 500 hours. And Amrisa is asking about the peer support websites to get the hours. There is a thing through your guys right here, the Washington Peer Network, where they will link employers with peers looking for jobs. So that's where I direct everybody. So the mental health provider is slightly different than what they call a behavioral health provider in the laws for this. So do you know what credential she has? Is it like a licensed mental health counselor or psychologist?
Yes, LMCH.
That is considered a behavioral health provider. There's a lot of overlap, but not all of them work. Like the AACs, the AAC licensed and certified AACs are considered mental health providers, but they're not approved supervisors for this. But LMHC is an approved supervisor for this credential. So they can supervise you for your hours, for all of the 500 hours that you would need for that as a trainee, and can sign off on all of that through July of 2028. After July of 2028, then it reverts to only the certified peer support specialist being able to be an approved supervisor for the trainees. And again, that's just for trainees. Regular peers, there's no supervision requirement on our end for who's their regular supervisor. There is for Medicare billing and stuff like that, but LMHC would still qualify for that.
Okay, and that was my second question. So in order to do the billing, like what do you have to do in order to start billing as a peer?
Well, are you in an agency?
Yes.
Okay. So once you have an active credential, you're able to bill as a peer, as a trainee, or as a full CPSS, you're able to do that. If you're billing like Medicaid, then you do need to be under an MHP for that. So it's not like an approved supervisor's kind of situation. They just need to be able to review your work still like a standard supervisor, as opposed to an approved supervisor for your hours. So for the agencies, they generally have that lined up pretty well. They know who needs to do that kind of work. So I would just talk with the LMHCA, your supervisor, the LMHC for that. And the billing process for your agency, they should have that all lined up. But it sounds like the way you're set up now is fine.
Okay. Well, okay, so because it's a small practice, so it's like just her, and I don't think that she exactly knows, and so this is something that she wanted me to ask. Would it be underneath her NPI and taxonomy, or it would be under
yours? Yeah, you shouldn't be billing under another person's codes for your work. You should be billing under your own.
Okay.
So you're not a BHA then? You're not a licensed agency? No.
I'm not sure. I know that we have a group NPI and then her own NPI.
Okay, you might be then, because there is usually an agency NPI that they can bill underneath that for the agency can kind of collectively bill for that. So you just have to check to see if she's licensed as a BHA or not. She should know. There's like $1,000 fee every year, so I would think that she would know if she was paying that. And that might have some separate codes or separate ways to work. But HCA is really kind of the billing group for that. I don't do much with billing. That's HCA agency thing, and so they can get more specific for you if you reach out to them.
Okay, so they have a billing something.
They have a whole billing section. Yeah, they have specialists and things like that to go. You need to apply with the Department of Health for the Certified Peer Support Specialist Trainee application. So fill that out, and you'll have to submit your 80-hour training certificate, fill out the application. There's no fee. You just need to get it and get it sent in for us. We're running at about 90 days, what we've been talking about. Right. Once that's active, then you can start. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to find someone that qualifies as an approved supervisor, which again is defined in the WAC and the RCW for that. find some of that, and then you can start providing peer services. If you're not working at an agency and you're just trying to pull in clients, that might be a little difficult. The WPN, they do have a thing where they're trying to link people for employers. People will take volunteers. So even if you only have, like, you could work on the weekends or something for one day, you can start getting your hours that way as long as you're under an approved supervisor. And if you find like a bigger organization, like Peer Law or some of those kind of things, they have different branches. They may take somebody in like part-time for that and help you get your hours in, get some time as a peer, and get that supervision hours to become a full peer.
Okay. So first do my application process. Once that application is complete, then I start my 1,000 hours. Don't do my 1,000 hours first.
Yep. Nope. You wait till it's active. You got to wait till your CPSS with DOH is active. Then you can start with that. Well, if they're licensed as an SUDP, that is qualified as an approved supervisor. So if you're providing peer work for the SUDP agency, not SUD treatment work, I mean, maybe SUD peer work, but as long as you're not a clinical provider for that, then those hours can work for it. If you're working on your own, you might have to look to have an outside supervisor that can talk with you on your own peer cases and stuff like that to get that supervision. And that's kind of the situation the last lady was in, is she didn't have, a job lined up. She was just trying to get those hours. And so that might be more bringing in somebody from the outside that can you can meet with, talk about your clients, the caseload issues that come up, and meet with them, and then you can count up those hours as well. If not, you would only be able to count the SUD side hours and not the way you were doing in private practice on your own.
Okay. So how would I go about logging those hours? Is there like a sheet somewhere that
Nope, we don't track a log. Yeah, I would suggest logging them on your own, using an Excel sheet or something like that to just total everything up and track them. We only ask for that signed attestation form at the end that your supervisor would sign off on and say, yes, I supervised them for 1,000 hours from, this date to this date, and they got this many hours, and then send that in. Yeah, we're not going to get any medical records. That's not what we're looking for. That is the release so that we can run the background check to look for criminal convictions and some things like that. So we're not going out for get your medical records. We're not going to pull everything about you as a person to come forward for that. We're really going to conduct either a Washington State Patrol or an FBI background check on you to get that information. And then we reach out to you to, like if you had conviction history or something, to get the records for us.
So they've got a couple of questions in the chat really quick, and then we will be ending in 5 minutes. So Jeffrey says it sounds like you have to have an active trainee credential for the hours to count. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I saw one earlier here was asking about the AAC, keeping the AAC with the CPS if you're doing like case management work.
Yeah.
And how would you define that? It's going to be defined by the billing codes. So if you try and bill for case management, you can do it with an AAC. You can't do it with a CPSS. You're going to be a lot more limited in the codes that you can bill for. So that's usually a good line of what you can and can't do with the credential.
Okay. And then Lisa said, my only question is, do we need to resend all the court docs and letters if already CPC?
Well, the CPC is not a thing. If you were at AAC, and you submitted all your court records to us for the first credential, for the AAC credential, then you don't need to resubmit all that stuff. We can just use the ones you had before. You can just write up a note that says, please use all my my conviction, my court records that I submitted for my AAC, and give the AAC credential number, and we'll just reuse them. You don't have to go get them again. But the CPC, that's the training from HCA. They don't do a background check. They don't get any documents. They don't have any of that stuff.
Money.
It can, yeah, for the records. So that's why you want to specifically ask for just the judgment and sentencing documents, which should be the stuff at the end, which will give you a lot less papers. Because if you ask for everything, it'll be like a $300 bill sometimes, right? People are like, I can't pay that. But if you want just those judgment sentencing, it should be less, because I think it's like 15 cents a page or something like that.
Okay, good. And then another question I had, do you want the whole criminal history, or does it backdate to like 7 years, 12 years, something like that?
It's going to be the whole thing. It's going to be everything that comes up on the background check for that. But the The older it is, a lot of times they don't have records. So if you
Okay.
go to the court and they're like, "This is 15 years ago, we don't have this," just give us the letter that says they don't have any.
Okay. Thank you.
There's one more comment in the chat here about you can work as an independent CPSS trainee. That's correct. You have to have a supervisor, but they don't have to be like in your hip pocket watching everything that you're doing. They just have to be able to, you have to meet with them at least every other week, kind of go over their work. They need to be able to reach out if you have an issue, and then they can sign off on your hours for that. So it's not something where you have to be like heavily monitored. So it's easier to do it in an agency because they have the system kind of set up for that, but it's not required.
Thank you, everybody, for the participation.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Look out for some material soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.